Hello and welcome to another ThunderQuack Network podcast network roundtable hangout YouTube thing. We are welcoming you to our time together. Andy and Michael are already with us. We hope to see a few more faces here. Make sure you use this comment section to the side. We'll keep track of that and hopefully bring in some of your comments into the conversation. I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Kurtis Findlay, and I'm one of the hosts of the Pullbox podcast, where Michael Cohen and I talk about comics. We pick comics to read. Hold on a second. I just had to mute the other window because it was making noise. Sorry about that. Yeah, we pick comics every month and read them, and then in the following episode, we talk about what we just read, and then pick some more comics to read for the next episode. So you can join us as we go through every month and read new comics, new and exciting stuff. And I want to introduce you to my co-host, Tim. Introduce yourself.
Hey, what's up, everybody? My name's Tim from Star Wars: The Saga Continues podcast, and I'm excited to be on this roundtable. It's going to be a good one, our favorite cartoon show. So it's going to be a real fun discussion. I can't wait to really get into it.
Cool. Well, let's start talking about cartoons. Yeah, we're going to talk about our favorite cartoons that we had when we were growing up. I want to break this down into a couple of different eras, starting with talking about the cartoons that we really liked when we were really young kids, and I'm talking like maybe 5 to 8. What are some of the shows, Tim, that you used to watch when you were that age?
Yeah, there was a lot of cartoons I watched as a kid, but the one that sticks out the most during that era that was good back then, and I think is still great today, is DuckTales. And that show, that's the one I have probably the most fondest memories, most clear memories of watching as a kid, and of actually watching episodes for the first time, remembering what that was like. And man, just the stories on there were just, it was enough for where kids loved it, and then adults loved it, because I know my parents liked watching it with us too. And then actually not too long ago, we got the DVDs for it. I watched them with my brothers, kind of like just going back in time and reliving our childhood, and they hold up remarkably well. I mean, really, really good. They were just as fun as I remember them, and then picking up jokes that maybe I missed as a kid watching it for the first time. But yeah, DuckTales is one of my all-time favorite series. I mean,
now hold on a second. I think that I'm not getting your picture's not showing up here on the video. How do I get that to work? I don't know how we make this.
I feel like we switched right there for a second. I went on the main screen.
Oh, and then stop presenting. This is interesting. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to, what it's going to do here. Is everyone just looking at my face?
It seems like it right now.
I want it to automatically change, and it's not automatically changing. There's you. Everybody, this is Tim. Wave to the camera.
You can see me now, huh?
Okay, but tell us again a little bit about DuckTales. I love that show too, by the way. That was one of my favorites growing up as well. And but what are some of the episodes that you distinctly remember that are your favorites?
One of them, as far as the early, I think it was the first season of it. One episode I always liked was the one, I don't remember the episode where Gyro creates that robot Armstrong to help out with stuff, but then he goes bad and wants to he captures Scrooge and Gyro, and they have to stop him. And then later on, I think they actually use that same story for another episode where the Beagle Boys steal Gyro's construction workers that were in that same Armstrong design. But there's something about that episode that I just liked. It was that seeing that robot in action, and I always like that scene where he's has that race with Launchpad in the plane, seeing who was the better pilot, a duck or a machine. That episode always stood out to me as one of my favorites. And then later on, I liked the Gizmo Duck era episodes too. When they brought that character in, I thought he was a good addition, and they had a lot of funny episodes, both as Gizmo Duck and just as Fenton Crackshell. His interactions with Scrooge was really funny stuff. So that episode, and then that era of DuckTales, there was a lot of good episodes, I think, with Gizmo Duck that are some of my favorites. Yeah,
a lot of people they have a love-hate relationship with those later episodes.
Yeah, I noticed that
with Bubba and all of that, and I wonder if I'm coming up there now. Let's see if
you still able to hear me? Because I can't hear you.
Are we listening to the theme song? Speak. Difficulties. Am I? Oh, I'm unmuted now.
There you are. Okay.
Okay, I was trying to show a video. Was it working?
I didn't see the video. That's why I think when you went mute.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Let's try that again. I'm trying to show a video, and I'm not exactly sure how to do that. Yeah, we're all learning this for the first time, people. So bear with us. And maybe you can't see video. Oh, too bad. I was going to show you some theme songs. I'm going to try this again. Tell me if this still works.
No, you just went mute again.
Okay, so that maybe we'll forgo the videos. That's too bad. How do I get back to my screen now? This thing is so weird. Oh, I lost my picture entirely. Oh, okay. There we are.
We're back.
Wait, we're back. And it looks like the auto cameraman is working properly too. Okay, forget videos. We're just going to talk a little bit more about that, about DuckTales. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about DuckTales too, because that was one. It actually is my top pick for favorite cartoons as well. Believe it or not, that we both have the same top theme show. And I just remember when I was young watching that one and being so involved in the stories, the adventure of it, and it was the perfect show because we like, I'm coming out of watching preschool shows and such that all star animals or that kind of thing. So this was a good transition between going from that to an older kid show that is an adventure show.
Yeah,
because you have the talking animals, but then you also have the more mature storylines. So it totally captured me and drew me right in. And then of course from there, because of that show, I was a devoted Disney Afternoon fan throughout the rest of the 90s, really, until it stops.
They need to bring something like that back, I think. Just to have like a whole lineup of shows like that. I remember them talking about, or it's actually confirmed that they are developing a new DuckTales series. So I wonder if maybe they're going to test the grounds with that and maybe revitalize the whole Disney Afternoon thing for like a whole new generation.
What are your thoughts on a DuckTales reboot?
Yeah, I'm kind of torn on it. At the same time, I think it's cool if we do get some good new DuckTales episodes and new stories. But what I'm worried about is if they try to modernize it too much. Like, I'm worried about something where Huey, Dewey, and Louie are part of the Junior Woodchucks, and instead of pulling out the Junior Woodchucks guidebook, they put out the Junior Woodchucks app, and they start using stuff like that.
I'm sure that they will. I mean, have you remember the show Quack Pack?
Yeah, I remember promos for it. I never actually watched it. Even that, I was like, I don't like this version of Huey, Dewey, and Louie.
Well, and that's what it was. They were just trying to keep up with the times. And the thing about DuckTales is that it was timeless. Like that, They didn't make. I mean, they did make pop culture references in some way, in kind of sneaky, underhanded ways that don't date the show if you're watching it 20 years later. They had TV and stuff, but they invented their own technology. But then they also kept old style airplanes and automobiles and all that kind of stuff. So it was it had its own carved out set of time. So it wouldn't work exactly the same way if Huey and Dewey Louie were on iPads and Scrooge McDuck counted all of his money through his Google whatever thingy. I think Gizmo Duck had a touchscreen in his belly or something.
And another thing, too, I've heard about it was that I think they're planning to get new voice actors for all the characters, because I believe the voice actor who does Launchpad's voice in the old series kind of said that Disney actually reached out to him and said, we're going to go in a different direction with the voice casting. So that was a little disappointing to hear. But at the same time, Disney's going to get great voice actors to do it, and to be something that'll be comparable to the originals. But I'm a little bit surprised that they're not getting the originals, because just on the game we had a few years ago, the DuckTales HD remaster, they got all the original voice actors for that. And that was great. It was like getting a whole new DuckTales experience with episodes, but in a game. So I was kind of surprised by that.
And it's really strange because Disney's very particular about keeping the same voice through everything that they do. I mean, Jim Cummings has been Winnie the Pooh in everything Winnie the Pooh since the late '80s, and even I remember, let's see, Paige O'Hara is the voice of Belle from Beauty and the Beast, and even like she had some major vocal issues later on in her life, and she even continued to be Belle. Like they held on to her as the voice of Belle for as long as they could until she literally couldn't do it anymore, and they had to get somebody else. So they have that kind of loyalty, and same with Wayne Allwine, the voice of Mickey Mouse through the '90s. If you watch Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, the preschool show, his voice, he got so old that Mickey was not high pitched really anymore. He was not a squeaky mouse character. His voice was kind of lower just because he was older. And unfortunately, he died, and someone else has taken it up now. So it's weird that Disney wouldn't have that same loyalty to these DuckTales voices, especially Scrooge McDuck, who's been in a number of, like Alan Young has been in a bunch of different productions as Scrooge, not just DuckTales.
Yeah, he's done some Kingdom Hearts games recently too. Yeah,
and even like Mickey's Christmas Carol, and I don't know. Yeah, he just has. He was the voice in, what was that one where Mickey has the restaurant theater, House of Mouse. Like, yeah. But on the flip side, if you're going to actually do a real reboot, then why not cast all of them all over again? Wouldn't that be the point of a reboot? Otherwise, if it's too similar, then it's just a continuation, or it's like, where's the line that you draw there?
That's a good point. Yeah, I can see that. And that's the thing. It just all depends on, until we find out what direction they decided they're going to go with it. Is it going to be a more modern take, but at the same time have it be a reboot, but still have that timeless classic feel like the old one did too? So I don't know. It should be interesting. But with the whole thing about getting new voice actors, it kind of makes me lean towards the idea that they're going to go for like a more modern take on it, and just the characters maybe even look a little different visually. So I don't know. Kind of excited, and at the same time just like, I don't know, keeping expectations in check with it, because if it turns out to be great and it's almost as good as the original show, I mean, it's going to be awesome to have getting new DuckTales episodes on a weekly basis, or whatever they decide to release new episodes for that. So I'm hoping for the best, because it would be awesome to get new DuckTales episodes that are awesome.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan ever since I got into comics. After, this was after watching DuckTales. I discovered that all like DuckTales was based on old comics by Carl Barks, all the Uncle Scrooge comics from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Even particular episodes are taken directly from those stories, like the Armstrong one. And so if they can keep the flavor of the comics in the reboot, then I think they'll do fine, because those don't need to really be messed with. The original DuckTales show did a perfect job of just keeping that Carl Barks feel. So yeah, let's talk about another show. What else were you watching? This would be the late '80s, early '90s, I guess, that DuckTales was airing. What else were you watching during that era?
No, I'm going to pull out a show that I find not too many people know about, so I'm curious if you've heard about it, Kurtis. Have you ever heard of a show called Dinosaurs?
Yes, I have heard of Dinosaurs, but I never watched it.
Okay. Yeah, that was a show I used to watch all the time too. It would always be up, like aired early in the morning before I go to school, so I'd always see it. But as a kid, it's like the coolest premise ever. You got aliens that are dinosaurs, but at the same time, like they know how to speak, and they have like this big technology. So there's this group of dinosaurs, like one of them called the Tyrannos. They're like the bad guys, and you have the good dinosaurs, and they come to Earth. They each have set up their own base. Well, like the good guys are like the mountains, and the bad dinosaurs are in the tar pits. But what's cool about it is that each dinosaur, it's like sci-fi show, so they each have these cool looking spaceships that you think this, like being with a dinosaur, like a dinosaur character, you wouldn't need spaceships. But when you see their spaceships and how cool they look, it's like, man, I want to see more action with their ships, or I want to see more action with them just as dinosaurs and all that. So seeing the animation was really good on it, the character designs, and they had these cool weapons and powers too. I know the good guys, would have this thing called Dynavolve, where they have like this button on this chest where if they hit it, they turn into like just normal dinosaurs that we know about, and just pretty much not wreak havoc, but take down all their enemies that they need to. But unfortunately, they didn't use that too much. Which, as a kid, you was always expecting to see that and hoping for them to use that in the series. And then the bad guys would have a weapon called a Devolver, I believe, and it would actually turn like anyone it fires on, it would turn them into like fossils and almost petrify them in a way. And like one of the main points of the series was the bad guys, the Tyrannos, were trying to steal that technology of Dino-volving because they didn't have that ability. Only the good guys did. So yeah, character designs were good, and of course they had to have the good guys anyway had to have human sidekicks to team up with, who were like teenagers who were known as the Secret Scouts. But those are, when they were featured, they weren't the ones that I was really drawn to. Of course, as a kid, you're going to want to see the dinosaurs. So that show, I know it's not too well known, but it left an impression on me with the character designs, the cool technology, weapons, and animation on it. It was really cool. And it was developed by actually Michael Uslan, who was like the executive producer on all the Batman movies pretty much, and got Batman from 1989 off the ground. So I always thought that was cool. That before he was pretty much associated with Batman, Dinosaurs was one of his shows that he created. So, yeah, I have fond memories of watching that TV series.
Cool. Is it out on DVD?
No, it's not, unfortunately. I think it was on Amazon not too long ago, but I checked actually today to see if it was still there, and it says not available now. So, I don't know. I was hoping for a DVD release because I'd love to have that whole series in a collection.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. My guess is that with obscure shows like that don't get DVD releases, it's probably on YouTube. I could probably check it out there.
Yeah,
I'd play the theme song for it if I could. Right here. If only that was working. Okay, so another show that I was watching at the time, at the same time that Disney Afternoon, like Fox was the station to watch, I think.
Yeah.
Aside from YTV, because they showed the Disney Afternoon after school on weekdays. And then on Saturday morning, they had the Fox Kids Network. And that block of shows, I watched a lot of the shows there. And some of my favorites were Bobby's World.
Oh, yeah.
I watched that one a lot. And Eek the Cat.
Eek's awesome.
Yep, Eek the Cat.
I think that's a real underrated cartoon.
It really is. It was so great. Just the slapstick. It was a throwback sort of to old Looney Tunes, but in a kind of a little bit of a Ren and Stimpy-ish way, except Ren and Stimpy wasn't out at that point. I don't think. Maybe it was airing at the same time, but definitely influenced by kind of the old Looney Tunes. And so that one was a lot of fun. And another one that I watched on, I think, weekday afternoons was Tiny Toon Adventures. Mm-hmm. Were you into that one at all?
Yeah, that was like maybe one of the first like weekday afternoon shows that I started watching for the first time, because a lot of it was always like Saturday mornings and in even like early weekday mornings too. But I remember Tiny Toons being one of the first, at least for me anyway, where it was on like weekday afternoons. It was pretty late too. Like I might be wrong, but I want to say it was airing like at 4:35, something like that. But I just remember it being pretty late.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think it was. It wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't right. Well, maybe. I can't remember even what network. I think that was on Fox as well.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I remember the very first episode, I think, at least that I saw, it might have been the second one that aired, was where they did a parody of Star Wars. So I'm like, oh, this is great. A new show with Tiny Toons about Star Wars. This is awesome.
Yeah, and I remember one of the standout episodes of that one is that, because the premise of that show is that it's like the next generation of Looney Tunes, and they all of the characters are sort of younger versions of the classic Looney Tunes characters. And then they're all going to school together to learn how to be Looney Tunes. And all of their teachers are the original Looney Tunes cast. So Bugs Bunny teaches a class on comic theory or whatever. And then the younger versions of him are Buster and Babs Bunny, and they're the stars of the show. And there's one episode where they go down, like Babs is kind of upset because there are no real female Looney Tunes characters. So she feels like she doesn't have a mentor like all of the others do. So she discovers down in the archives of the school, where all of the films are kept, that there is a character called Honey. And so she goes on this quest, I think it's a 2-part episode, to find Honey, this random character, and it takes her to a town called Two Tone Town. It's a black and white town where all of the forgotten old black and white cartoon characters that's where they live because no one remembers them anymore. And then she eventually finds Honey and finds a mentor in her and stuff like that. But that show, flash forward years later when I'm an adult and I'm totally into all of the classic cartoons from the 30s and 40s, especially the kind of the late black and white era once they introduced sound. And one of the earliest cartoon Looney Tunes characters is Bosco and Honey, and they are both in that episode of Tiny Toons, and I'm like, I remembered those guys, but I didn't remember where, and then I realized, oh, it's Tiny Toons, and that one episode that stuck with me all these years then came kind of full circle, and yeah, it kind of maybe that's what sparked an interest in those whole cartoons in the first place.
Tiny Toons for me, I mean, I watched it as a kid, but it was one of those shows where I haven't seen in a very long time, so I don't have a very good memory on like specific episodes. There's certain moments that maybe stick out, but for whatever reason, I don't know if it was because it got kind of lost in a bunch of other great TV shows that came out during that era, and maybe I just kind of forgot about it a little bit. But I always remember enjoying watching it. Just as of right now, it's been years since I've seen it, so I just don't have a clear memory of pretty much a lot of the episodes from that series. So I should go back and watch them again one of these days.
It's pretty fun. I would recommend checking it out, and it's all out on DVD, so it's easy to find.
Yeah, because like you said, it's a great premise. Like the old Looney Tune characters teaching the next generation. I mean, that's just such a great premise for a TV show like that.
Yeah, and each episode is divided up into like 3 stories, I think. So some of them are full-length stories if they really wanted to get ambitious, but and it worked well. I mean, they kept the slapstick, they kept the humor. There's cultural references. It really is sort of a modern Looney Tunes, and it was produced by Steven Spielberg and his animation unit from Amblin Animation, and it was their answer actually to DuckTales and Chip and Dale, because when Disney stayed away from TV animation for a long time, and when they came out with the shows like there's the Wuzzles and Gummy Bears, and then DuckTales eventually. They decided, and Michael Eisner was in charge of this. One of the best things that he did for Disney was he decided that he wanted to make sure that if they were going to go into TV animation, it was going to be high quality stuff. They wanted to really bump up the level of animation and the quality of the shows that were being shown at the time, because otherwise he had like Super Friends and He-Man that were so limited in the animation, and the stories were so just basic and I don't know, pandering to little children. So they wanted to do stuff that was serious. And then, we have a dramatic increase in quality. And because of that, a bunch of other studios wanted to follow suit. And so Steven Spielberg sort of backed to this project by Warner Brothers to do Tiny Toons, to step up their game and create some quality animation for them as well. And it worked. It really worked for them. And from there, then you have other shows like, Batman and like all cartoon animation just absolutely changed at that point to becoming something a lot better. It lasted through the 90s, and then we got into computer animation, and then things got a little divided. But that's for later on. Let's continue talking. We're still in the kind of the early 90s, and both of us, we're about the same age, so we're about 9 and 10 around this time. Mm-hmm. What are some of the shows you were watching when you were, maybe 10 to 13 in the later school age?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, during that time, especially when I was like 9 and 10, I mean, this is going to be the crown jewel of my animation picks, and you just alluded to it earlier about Batman the Animated Series. I mean, to me, that's just as good as it gets for me as far as animation, as far as just even Batman as a character. That's my definitive version of Batman, and just the precedent that it set for series afterwards. I mean, you're talking about how kind of like the Disney Afternoon did that, but I think Batman was the first one to do it for a more serious take where it wasn't comedy, and just it pulled it off so good. So good. And I usually kind of slacked off a little bit in recent years, but I always try to make it a yearly tradition once the DVDs came out, just to watch the entire series almost every year because it's just so good. And yeah, I just remember the first time I watched it. I mean, that was 92 was a big year for me in my Batman fandom because we got Batman Returns coming out. That was actually the first Batman movie I saw in theaters because I was a little too young for the 89 one, but Batman Returns came out. I saw that in theaters, and my Batman fandom was just at its peak as a little kid. And then when I found out they were doing a TV series, it's like, oh man, I can't wait for this. And then actually, I will admit, I'm ashamed to admit this, when I saw the very first episode, which was The Cat in the Claw, it was like a Saturday morning sneak peek with Catwoman, I was a little disappointed with it because as a little kid, I was like, wait a second, I kind of want it to be more like the movies. I go, the suit's not black and Catwoman doesn't look like how she did in the movie. Like, what is this? I don't know if I like his voice. I was like, now that I think about it, me doubting Kevin Conroy's voice as Batman is like, how could I say that as a kid? But
yeah, no kidding.
But yeah, what stood out to me most about that series, because I mentioned earlier before how like my parents like to watch DuckTales with us because they got a kick out of it, but I think for the first few episodes, they might have enjoyed Batman the Animated Series more than I did as a 9-year-old kid. I mean, that the second episode, or I should say the first episode to air on weekdays was Heart of Ice, the classic Mr. Freeze story. And I just remember, like, my mom in particular was saying, man, that was really good. I got emotional during that whole arc of Mr. Freeze. I was like, wow, really? Like, you like the show as much as I do? Huh. I found that very strange as a little kid. Like, your parents like it some maybe as much as you did or maybe even more. But that's what makes Batman the Animated Series great. It set a whole new bar of quality for children TV shows. I mean, the storylines they were able to produce there was very dramatic. You got some great episodes early on too. Some of my favorites were, like I mentioned, Heart of Ice, and then you got Appointment in Crime Alley, which kind of deals a little bit with how Bruce goes about dealing with his parents' murders and how on a yearly basis he pays his respects to them at Crime Alley. Such a great story. And then Robin's Reckoning, how you get Dick's origin, how he became Robin, and just the father-son relationship you saw build there between those two characters. They just did such a great job. I mean, Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, Alan Burnett, Eric Radomski, the main producers of that show, they just really knocked it out of the park. Like I said, it's my definitive version of Batman, and I don't know if anything will top it. We'll see, because we know we're always going to get new versions of Batman out there, whether it's a new animated series, new movies, new comic book iterations, but still to this day, that's the version that can't be beat. I mean, Batman the Animated Series really had a strong impact on me as a kid. And then just the legacy it left behind, too, with the whole DC animated universe, how Superman, Batman Beyond, Justice League, how they're all connected as part of one canon universe. And it all started from Batman the Animated Series. So, yeah, it's going to be always my favorite, not only cartoon, but just one of my favorite TV shows, period. It's so good.
Wow, yeah, and I have to say that that's one of my favorites as well, definitely. But I never really watched it when it first aired. I was actually a Marvel guy growing up. But when I got my first comic books, they were all Marvel, Spider-Man, and so I, even at that young age, I understood kind of the rivalry between Marvel and DC, and I was totally Marvel all the way. So when that show came out, I didn't really care for it. I didn't watch it, but then a couple years later, the Spider-Man show came out on Fox, and yeah. I just ate that one up. That one was so great, and because I was already familiar with all the characters and the major storylines that they were trying to do, and that show I think lasted almost all through my high school years. So I was watching that on Saturday mornings, but then I got back into Batman the Animated Series and through reruns, and I tried to watch all of them. But they aired it kind of sporadically, and then Columbia House came out with a video, like Columbia House, where you buy a bunch of videos for a penny and then you whatever. So they had Batman the Animated Series VHS, and they had episodes that were different than the ones that were available commercially, because there were only like 8 or 12 episodes that were available on VHS commercially, and so I started buying them through Columbia House. And get this, there were 4 episodes per VHS, and I think that they were $25 each. So you think about that with like you can get full seasons of shows for $25 on DVD or Blu-ray. So it's like that's how much VHS were back then. Like that was normal. But yeah, I ate it up. And then from then, I think I followed. I followed Batman Beyond, and that's when I really got into the whole DC animated universe. And then followed it from then on out. And there, you talk about how many different versions of Batman there have been over the years, and there have been some other really great Batman shows as well. They don't top the animated series, but one of my favorites is the Brave and the Bold cartoon that came out a couple of years ago. What a fantastic show, and especially if you are familiar with the golden age of Batman, it's just all throwback. Every single episode, every single character, every line of dialogue, it's all paying tribute to Batman's history, and it's wonderful and it's funny, funny in a not as a campy way. It's like it's also paying tribute to the Adam West series as well, and but it's fantastic too. But so we're getting ahead of ourselves there too. We'll talk about that one a little bit more later.
Cool.
But yeah, we have. Let's see. We're still in the early '90s, and I asked on the little sidebar here what did other people watch, and Crystal wants to make sure that we talk about Darkwing Duck, especially since that's where ThunderQuack Podcast Network gets its name.
Good point, yes.
Definitely. So yeah, we'll talk about Darkwing Duck for a little bit. I know that I watched that one all the time. Like I said, I was a devoted Disney Afternoon fan, and that was the first show because every year they bumped the oldest show and introduced a new show. And so that was the first new show introduced. So the original lineup for the Disney Afternoon was DuckTales, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, and no, it was Gummy Bears.
Yeah, that's right. That was number one.
Which I could never watch because it was on at 3 o'clock or 3:30. I never made it home from school on time. So I could never watch that one. And then, so yeah, it was Gummy Bears, DuckTales, Chip 'n Dale, and Tailspin. Both those last two shows I absolutely loved as well. And then they bumped Gummy Bears, and they introduced Darkwing Duck, and it was so great because it's a superhero show, and we love superheroes, and also because it was a spin-off essentially of DuckTales, and because I was a huge DuckTales fan, I was thrilled to see Launchpad in another show doing more things, continuing his adventures. And then eventually they brought in Gizmo Duck as well for a few episodes.
Yeah, that was a highlight for me.
Definitely. The 2-part episode where Darkwing essentially forms his version of the Justice League called the Justice Ducks with Gizmo Duck and a couple other people. Like that's one of the standout episodes for me. That show was great.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, you watched that show too?
Yeah, it's one of those shows I haven't seen in a while too, and I would like to go back and watch it because the characters that stood out for me in that show were the villains. They had some great villains on that show, just visually and even from a comedic standpoint too. I think one of my favorites was Megavolt. I just love his design and even his voice too. It always cracked me up as a kid. But then you had Bushroot. I always liked him, and then I can't remember his name, but it was the dog who was in liquid form though.
Yeah, the Liquidator.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, I remember the episodes where like they kind of formed like their own supervillain team up also, and then I don't know if I'm remembering it right, but I want to say they get transported like to a parallel dimension or something, and then they're actually good guys. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just remember they actually go up against Mega Duck, who was their leader, and they actually go against him, and they're like working with Darkwing Duck in some way. I don't know, but I'm not sure if I'm remembering quite right, but I remember they like switched sides and teamed up with Darkwing for one episode, if I'm correct. But
I'm sure they did. I actually don't. That one doesn't ring a bell. The parts of it sound familiar, but yeah, there's that whole show isn't out on DVD yet, so maybe it's in one of those episodes that hasn't been out yet. But you say you haven't revisited in a long time, and it's interesting to say that because I just recently did revisit it with my kids, and they love it. But it's from Tailspin to Darkwing Duck. There's actually a pretty dramatic drop in quality. They don't go. The backgrounds aren't as lush. They often just use blank, just kind of gradient backgrounds, and the animation's a little stiffer. It's not as full as like DuckTales and such. So they had to cut back, I think, a little bit on the quality there. But the stories were still funny, and it worked. It slapstick, and my boys really like that show. Actually, we watch that one all the time.
Oh, that's cool. I always love hearing when like the shows we watched as kids is passes down to another generation, they still enjoy it as we do. That's always good to hear.
Yeah, it is. Well, when you have some quality stuff, then there you go.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Andy says that he watched. He was an anime guy in the '90s. He was watching Sailor Moon and Digimon, and that's moving a few years now into more of the mid '90s, and Digimon is the late '90s. So we can start talking a little bit about that. In the actually, you know what? The mid '90s that's when Spider-Man really took off,
Mm-hmm.
and so I was watching that show a lot, and that talk about cutting on quality. That show was a mix of really great quality and really terrible quality all at once.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
There were the episodes. They were just they used flashbacks all the time. I think at least once a season there had to be a Spider-Man origin recap, I guess. I don't know if it was to fill time or what, but Peter Parker was always flashing back to when Uncle Ben died. And then there were like action sequences with explosions where it looked like the characters were animated on tubes because they moved so choppily, like just from one point to the other, it wasn't smooth at all. They really cut out a lot of their in-betweens, and I don't know if that was to save money or to meet deadlines, but it was so noticeable, even for me, not knowing anything about animation. It's like, why is this so different than the rest of the show? But I loved it. It was so great, and especially at the very end, the last few episodes, where Spider-Man has to he goes looking, he goes kind of dimension hopping because Mary Jane gets sucked into a portal, and he meets multiple versions of Spider-Man. So
Yes.
And a whole bunch of different Spider-Men team up, and now, just coming off of this huge Spider-Man comic story in the comics currently called Spider-Verse, like that was exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They saved the world by teaming up. They saved all of their different dimensions by teaming up, and that was fantastic. It's kind of a little spider nerd dream come true.
Yeah, it was a great way to end the series. That last episode, it was really fun to see all those different Spider-Mans. But then, of course, the Spider-Man from the series, the one we all know and love, still has to be the one that saves the day. But
Of course.
Then the end sequence too, where you actually meet Stan Lee and realize in this universe, I'm just a fictional character. But yeah, that whole series, I'm with you too. Especially the first few seasons, it was really good. And that Spider-Man, the voice actor who does it, that's like kind of how Kevin Conroy is my definitive Batman voice. When I read the comics, I hear his voice. I still hear that Spider-Man's voice when I read a comic. I think that's the best one we've had so far. But I do agree with you about the animation issues. The thing that always got me was almost every episode they'd reuse, like they'd recycle animation, like any chance they get to try to save on the budget and all that. That would just get annoying. And then the Kingpin was in almost in every episode too. It's like, can we get an episode without the Kingpin? Somehow.
Yeah, well, it was nice to have the Kingpin pulling strings and having that continuity to tie the episodes together, because you didn't really get that in cartoons at that time. That was one of the earliest cartoons to really have full season story arcs. Each season was a full complete story.
Yeah, that and X-Men, I think, did the best job of that.
Oh yeah, I guess X-Men did that. That was a few years before that too. But yeah. Especially in the later seasons, talking about recycling animation, they did that so much. Every explosion was an explosion taken from a previous episode.
Yeah, and if you watch closely, you might even see a shot where Spider-Man's getting hit by like the Scorpion or something, and he's not even in that episode that you're watching. Stuff like that. Like,
yeah. Did you know that Prince Eric from The Little Mermaid is the same voice as that Spider-Man from that show?
You know what? I just found out about that not too long ago because I was playing the Kingdom Hearts 2, the HD remix, and then when I saw the credits, I was like, hey, well, that looks familiar. Then I looked it up on behindthevoiceactors.com, and it's like, sure enough, he did Spider-Man too. I was like, what? I would never have guessed that. And then when I started playing like the Little Mermaid levels in that game, I was like, okay, I could definitely tell it's him. Yeah, he has that same quality of voice as he did for Peter Parker.
Yeah. And then there was a Spider-Man video game that came out a few years ago, probably like maybe 6 years ago by this point, where there were 4 different Spider-Man or something like that. And they brought back all of the previous voice actors from the previous shows to voice these characters, all the different ones, including um, Christopher Daniel Barnes from the '90s show, and Neil Patrick Harris, who was the voice of Spider-Man in the mainframe animation show, and man, I can't remember who the name of the guy from Super Friends, Dan Sullivan or something, I think. But yeah, they brought him back. So it was like an all-star reunion of past Spider-Man voice actors. It was really neat.
Yeah, that was a big draw for the game. I like that game a lot too. But then hearing those voices that you knew before too just added to it. So yeah, I kind of wish for like a Batman game like that too, but because I enjoyed that Spider-Man one so much. But yeah, anytime we can get like familiar voice actors from either games or TV shows all in one story, it is always awesome to hear. I guess that would be the right word to use.
Andy says that Kingpin was one of his early favorite villains as a kid. And
definitely a great villain, just way too overused in that series for me anyway.
Yeah. But it was interesting that he was used in that show. I never, from the comic books, I guess he was in the comic books, but I associated him more with Daredevil. So, and it was neat to see. So it was neat to see when Daredevil did show up in the Spider-Man show to fight the Kingpin, because that was like a nice little nod there.
Yeah, I was actually surprised it took that long to bring him in, because I think it was the beginning of season 3 is when Daredevil was brought in, and the whole storyline with the Kingpin.
Yeah, and that's something that that show had a lot of guest stars. Because X-Men were in there a few times, and Doctor Strange made an appearance. Daredevil, like you said, the Punisher was there for crying out loud.
Blade.
Blade. That's right. Captain America. Yeah, in one of the later episodes. But then you never, in the X-Men show, they never had a ton of guest stars.
It was always teases. I don't know if you remember the 5th part of the Phoenix Saga, where like the world's having all the disasters happening, and then tornadoes was like hitting New York, and then you see like, I think it was a bench or something about to hit someone, and then you see Spider-Man's hands just fling out and do a web shot to save the pedestrian, but they never show his face. They just show him shooting a web out. I was like, I want to see him. And
it was, and I don't think at that time they hadn't licensed out all of their characters to different studios. That was more of a kind of a later '90s thing. Once they were getting into financial trouble, but they were both shown on Fox. So yeah, why didn't they cross over? And it was the Fox version X-Men that showed up in Spider-Man.
Yeah, they eventually did, which was cool. It was like the first like superhero cartoon TV crossover that I remember anyway. That was kind of a big deal when those episodes aired.
Yeah, it was a really big deal. Yeah. So, and one of the things that I always found funny about that show was their self-imposed censorship, and it always comes up when you're talking about that show, because they never use the word death or die or anything like that. It's always destroy. I'm going to destroy you, or we'll be destroyed. Uncle Ben was destroyed.
Or watch out for the stun blast.
yeah, right. No real bullets, but that and then like just toning down characters like Carnage. Like you can't have a mass murderer on that show because it just doesn't work. So yeah, and then thinking about that and then comparing that to Batman, where they did use actual real machine guns. They actually did deal with things like death and just heavy topics. Like what a difference that made. I remember reading about Paul Dini and Bruce Timm talking about how much they pushed for that, and saying that they were going to do it tastefully, and it worked. It really paid off, and it's one of the things that makes that show so great, is that they weren't shying away from that.
Yeah, that's like the biggest difference between that series and, if you want to compare it with Spider-Man, is why that one holds up better than Spider-Man 1 does, because they were worried. It always puzzled me as a kid, like, how come they're able to do that more on Batman, but on this show they were not able to. But yeah, like you said, they kind of pushed to get that, and thankfully the censors, for the most part, and the networks were pretty okay with it. I know they get different notes sent to them saying, okay, you went a little too far there, or can you change this? But for the most part, they were able to do what they wanted to. And even I remember the one instance where in the episode Robin's Reckoning, where they were going to show Dick Grayson's parents like fall and die, but they got sent back saying no, you can't show that. And then how they directed it was even better than what they planned. It had a greater dramatic effect where you just see those silhouettes fall, and then you see the rope just like torn apart, just dangling there, and you see everyone gasping. I remember Bruce Timm even saying, "Yeah, this actually worked out better for us. So thank you, censor and network, for telling us we could do that."
Yeah, so much drama that really pays off in that sense. Andy wants to remind us also that blood was forbidden in the Spider-Man show as well, and that's true. From what I understand, Spider-Man self-censored. It wasn't the network that was censoring them. They did a lot of that themselves. They were just really cautious of their audience and who they were making the show for. So, and sure, they got censorship from the network as well. But a lot of those decisions, like not showing blood, and if Spider-Man jumps out of a glass window, you don't see all the broken glass flying all over the place. Like that was kind of their decisions. And so, yeah, I guess a different way of viewing things. But both of them worked, and Spider-Man still holds up. I still enjoy that show. Mm-hmm. There are better versions of Spider-Man on TV than that one, I think. But that one is definitely still good. One more show from the mid-'90s, and we can move on to sort of the later 90s. I absolutely loved The Tick. That one was one of my favorite shows through the mid-'90s there. Just a superhero satire about a big blue superhero, nigh invulnerable, called The Tick, who doesn't have an alternate ego. Like that's who he is. He's just The Tick. And he lives in an apartment with his sidekick, Arthur, who has a moth outfit. He has wings that he straps on his back, and neither of them have jobs. They just kind of hope to make it through the day, and they're just outlandish heroes and outlandish villains. It's just a fantastic, funny show. Really like it.
Yeah, I remember watching that too. It didn't last that long, if I'm right. Or at least I remember seeing. But yeah, like I said, just visually, it was, I think, appealing to kids, just seeing the different superhero costumes that a lot of the characters had. I know one of my favorites was Deflator Mouse. Because it reminded me, like, obviously the Batman ripoff of that show.
Yeah, definitely. And American Made was the Wonder Woman ripoff. And they just had such a great cast of villains as well. Chairface Chippendale,
with
a chair for a head. Mr. Mental and El Cid and Dinosaur Neil, who wasn't really a bad guy. He just grew to the size of a dinosaur. It just was so bizarre, and I loved it. Yeah, I think it was just 3 seasons. But that show just had such an impact on me because I knew about superheroes, so I felt like I was in on a lot of the jokes. Like I wasn't just watching it as a kid who was just watching it because it was on. Like I actually understood what they were making fun of, and I really, really enjoyed it. And then I found out it was based on actual comics.
Yeah.
And so I tracked those down, and they're great too. And that introduced me to kind of the world of alternative comics and underground comics, and that just led me on an entirely different path because I just started learning so much more about non-superhero comics at that point.
That's cool. I remember one of my favorite episodes from The Tick, probably is my favorite, is, I don't remember the name of it, but they go to like a club that's just for superheroes, and then like Arthur he's only allowed in the sidekicks lounge. And then The Tick encounters another hero named The Tick, and then
they have a big fight over who's the real Tick.
Yeah. Then you have that villain, like the Mad Bomber that bombs at midnight. Like that's all he was saying throughout the episode. That one just had a lot of great funny bits. Yeah, that's one that always sticks out to me as my favorite.
Yeah, and then there is the episode where, so I think like in the first episode, or no, one of the first episodes, it might have been the 3rd or 4th episode, the villain Chairface Chippendale decides that his evil deed is going to be to write his name on the moon.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So he goes and builds this giant death ray or whatever it is and starts to write his name, and he gets through CHA before the Tick manages to stop him. And so in the rest of the series, anytime they see the moon, there's a CHA on the moon all through the whole thing. And then in the 3rd season, I think there's a Galactus spoof, a character called Omnipotent. He comes and he hungers he's going to devour the planet. So the tick decides to let him take a bite out of the moon in order to calm his hunger down. And so he takes a big chunk out of the moon. And for the rest of the series, it's only that last season, I think. Now you see a CHA and a big bite out of the moon anytime they show the moon. So it was little things like that. It was such a good show. The writing was great, and it was voiced. I think the Tick was the same voice as Michelangelo from the '80s Turtles cartoon.
Oh, really?
I think so, if I'm right. And then Arthur was voice actor Rob Paulsen.
Yeah.
Famous Rob Paulsen, who is the voice of Raphael from the TV show from the '80s cartoon. So I think there's a connection there. I might be wrong. Don't quote me on that. Okay, moving on. Let's. Oh, you know what? Actually, another show that I watched around this time also was Reboot. Did you ever watch Reboot, Tim?
No, I never actually got into Reboot. Mm-mm.
Wow, Reboot was. To be honest, I didn't really get into Reboot either. It was the first computer animated television show, fully computer animated, and it was about a guy. It was about a city inside a computer. The citizens of an inside of a computer, and every character was a reference to some sort of piece of computer technology. And the premise of the show was that they live their life inside of your computer, and every once in a while, a giant cube, a purple cube, would come crashing down onto a sector of their city, and they had the hero Bob had to fly into the cube and defeat the bad guy inside the cube in order to save that portion of the city. If that portion of the city would be completely destroyed if he lost that battle. And then when he goes inside the cube, it turned out that was actually a video game that the person who's on the user of the computer would put it into their computer, into the disk drive at that time. And that was the video game that he was playing. So Bob would have to go into the video game, and he would be the opponent that the person would be playing against in the video game. So each episode was a different video game, essentially. And that was a groundbreaking show, and my brother loved it all the time. He watched it, and I kind of watched it here and there. I'm not really caring a whole lot about it until the end of the second season, when they actually upped the stakes and they introduced a couple of viruses that took over the computer and caused huge problems. And then in season 3, the tone completely changed to something way darker, more serious, and like the continuity ran through the entire rest of the series through season 3, and then the show was canceled. A few years later, they brought it back for a fourth season. But yeah, that show actually turned out to be really great. And Mainframe went on to do some Transformers shows, and I don't know. They have they're still making shows now. They did a Spider-Man show for a little while, and their home base is actually my hometown, Vancouver. So,
nice.
I get to know a bunch of people who worked on those productions and that kind of thing. So it's kind of nice. But yeah, if you haven't checked out Reboot, I would suggest checking it out. It's all on DVD now. You can find that. It's worth it, especially once you get into the third season. Really good.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. That was my one last mid-'90s thing. We can move on to kind of the later '90s. And Andy, I just want to mention, Andy, that he watched Sailor Moon and Digimon. Did you ever watch those shows, Tim?
No, I didn't really watch like Digimon or Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! But the anime I did watch during the late '90s was Dragon Ball Z. I was a big fan of that series and still am today. So it was great that we got to see a new movie just a few weeks ago with Resurrection M. So I'm a lifelong DBZ fan, so I'm always excited about now that they are making new movies for it. Just like never expected that to happen. But yeah, during like 98, 99 is when I first really got into Dragon Ball Z, and didn't really hear about it until they started showing on Cartoon Network. But kind of what drew me into it was how it was just so every episode was connected to each other, how serialized it was, where you cannot like certain ones that'd be fillers, like okay if you miss it, but you'd almost have to watch every episode to know the full story. So when I first watched it, I was like, man, this is like a long like either a multi-part episode arc that they're doing here, but no, that means like you can have an arc that's like 100 episodes or something. So that was like the first time I was exposed to that type of like anime storytelling they do for their shows. So yeah, great the action, of course, is what stands out with Dragon Ball Z. I mean, as someone who likes good action, like most young kids, or at that age, I was probably like in mid-teens during like 99, 2000s, 98, like those late 90 eras. But yeah, I really took to the characters too. They had great backstories, and then as you progress further into the series, how characters grow, and how also too another thing that I never seen before in a show is how you can see a character who starts out as a kid, and then you see him grown up into a full-grown adult. Like that's something, and for like a good long progression too. It's not like they fast forward like a few years after you only spent this like a few episodes with him as a 10-year-old or something. You see him as like a 5-year-old, 10-year-old, 15-year-old, and then like later as an adult. So I always love that aspect too, which kind of made me appreciate that like successful anime series. You could really get invested into characters that you love because they last for a long time than most like American shows too. So that was a big feature for it too, just being able to see characters grow. So yeah, DBZ was probably the main show I was watching during the late 90s era, but at the same time too, I was still in the DC animated universe with Batman Beyond, and then not too long after that, Justice League. So I would say those three shows during like 98 through 2000, 2001 would probably be those three main shows I would always watch: DBZ, Batman Beyond, and Justice League.
So definitely you were into the superhero action stuff.
Oh yeah.
Did you ever watch the Dragon Ball show when Goku was a kid?
Yeah, Dragon Ball is great. I mean, that's a comedy show, and it's really funny, especially those early episodes.
Yeah, that one, I watched that one as well. And then when Dragon Ball Z came out, was pretty shocked when it was so completely different, but compelling at the same time, of course, because I like the superhero stuff as well. So yeah, my brother and I watched that one all the time. And it's funny that you mentioned that you like the action in that, because for like one episode of action, there were like 10 episodes of building up to that big fight, where not a whole lot happened. And it infuriated me sometimes, because like you go 5 episodes and Goku would be powering up this giant ball of energy, and that's all he did for 5 episodes. So much filler, it seemed. But then,
sorry, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, I know that is a complaint about DBZ. Oh, like there's 2 episodes of them just powering up and taunting each other. But I don't know, I guess I was invested with those characters. And certain times they kind of do like a backstory and tell the history of what happened to them and all that. But now when I look at animes like Naruto, where I think those fillers episodes last way too long. It's like, man, DBZ was never this bad. But I do understand the complaints with that. But I guess... yeah, I've watched them not too long ago. I still never got that effect where it's like, okay, let's get to the point here. I still get invested to it. So maybe that's just me, but I don't know.
And they do a good job of just keeping the tension, so that, and there are so many characters in that show that they can flop it back to different side stories.
Yeah.
So it keeps it fresh. But yeah, you know that the reason they drew it out was just because they were trying to follow the comics, the manga so much, and they had to do those episodes because they were producing those episodes faster than the issues were coming out, because it was serialized, but only like 8 pages at a time. So you'd have to make a whole half-hour episode based on that limited amount of comic. So then they catch up and have to do a whole bunch of filler episodes that weren't in the comics because they had to wait for those ones to catch up and stuff.
Yeah,
that's
some
why,
are definitely better than others. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why Naruto does the same thing, and One Piece, and a bunch of those shows, the ones that are basically just straight adaptations of the manga. So I would be remiss to not mention my favorite show through the late 90s, which is Animaniacs. That one,
yeah. I'm sorry, I was going to say, like, I'm kind of kicking myself why I didn't mention it during the mid-early 90s era, but I'm glad you brought it up now, because, yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, and I remember because, yeah, that show debuted in 93, so it was kind of early 90s, but I was in grade 7, and one day everybody came to school, and they're like, "Did you watch that show? It was so funny." I'm like, "What show are they talking about?" So then I had to watch it, because everyone was watching. I wanted to know what they were talking about, and so it was and then I distinctly remember it was the episode that had Yakko's World. You know you know that song where Yakko
Yep.
sings "All of the Nations of the World."
Yeah.
That was my very first exposure to that show, and I'm like, holy cow, this is amazing! Not only is the animation just incredible on this, him actually pointing to all of those countries rhythmically, and just the amount of effort it would take to put all those words together. And then they had the episode. Then the episode after that was the one where they meet Einstein, and
Mm.
and then there was a Pinky and the Brain episode where he goes on the Jeopardy game show, and it was just that's still one of the best ones.
Yeah.
The show started so strong, and sort of petered out once it in its last season, but it was really great, and it's such a like a throwback again. They did an even better job of emulating the old Looney Tunes than Tiny Toons did,
Yes.
because it wasn't based on kind of a sitcom setup. It was actual just random shorts, and each short was a different character, like the old Looney Tunes were as well. It was really, really good, and I watched that one probably more than any other show. I loved it. I still love it. It's still good.
Yeah, that's another one of those shows that holds up just as well as it today as it did back when it first aired. Especially those early ones you were mentioning, such classics. I mean,
Yep.
my favorite Pinky and the Brain one was the episode Spellbound, where like pretty much the whole episode was just devoted to that one story.
Yeah, yeah. Nice
Pinky just
epic.
not able to come up with rhymes as a minstrel, which would infuriate Brain. All that stuff was just so good.
But it also wasn't. It doesn't hold up in certain aspects because there are so many cultural references as well. It's very much a product of its time in that sense. Whenever they're on the studio, the show is filled with movie stars of that era, young Mel Gibson and young Bruce Willis and that kind of thing, right? References to the movies of the time, and even even the other shows like Pinky and the Brain would make references to popular. And the theme song had Bill Clinton in it, for crying out loud. That's how dated it is. But it's still fun for our generation. And I tried to show some of those to my kids, but they're not quite ready to jump onto that one yet.
Okay. Yeah, I remember actually that was like that series when we really got into it. Like my whole family got sick with bronchitis for like a month, and that was kind of like everyone says laughter is the best medicine. that series provided the best medicine, I think, for us. And I remember we were just cracking up so loud. Like my dad had to come like, "What are you guys laughing at? Like, what's so funny?" Then he got hooked on the show too and started laughing. So that's like the point where Animaniacs solidified itself as a great show for us. Like we're just sick and we decided like lay on the couch or lay in bed watching TV and then just seeing those episodes would really crack us up. But yeah, Animaniacs is definitely one of the all-time greats and probably in my top 5 favorite TV cartoons ever. So yeah, good choice.
Okay, let's ask the people who are listening in. I want to hear some more of your shows that you watched. Anything that we haven't mentioned yet. This can anything not just from the late '90s, but anything from whenever you were a kid. What did you watch that we haven't already talked about? I'd be also interested, Crystal, if there are any girl shows that you watched that we haven't talked about, because we're just talking about superhero shows the whole time, pretty much. But there's so many, I don't know, this might be too old for you, but Gem and the Holograms and Rainbow Bright, Care Bears, and all those types of shows. So yeah, write them in the site comments there so we can have a look. But meanwhile, yeah, let's see. I'm just gonna flip back to my little tab that I have open here, see what else was on. Oh, did you ever watch Where on Earth is Carmen Sandiego?
Not the animated series, just the game show.
I watched the game show too, for sure. Not animated, but I guess the characters, the bad guys, were all animated, sort of.
Yeah, that's true.
But the cartoon was actually pretty fun. It follows these two teens as they race around the world and try to solve the crimes and stuff. It was good. I learned a lot. It's kind of educational and pretty fun. Didn't last very long. I think it was maybe just one season, but that was good. And then I also watched around that time as well was The Adventures of Sam and Max, Freelance Police. Did you ever watch that show?
You know what? No, I didn't. But now that you mentioned the name, it sounds familiar, but I can't quite place it as far as what it was exactly.
Yeah, well, it started I think as a comic book and then a video game and then it became a TV show, and it is just an off the wall, quirky, funny show about a rabbit and um, and a dog who are
Oh,
detectives.
okay.
Who are
Okay, now I know what
detectives.
you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
it's really funny, super good, and it's out on DVD. I suggest picking that up because it's just based blind by it because it's so funny. It holds up. It's got a neat, interesting style, and it's very well done. And then what was the other one I was going to mention that I watched as well? Oh, Earthworm Jim. Did you ever watch Earthworm Jim? Did you see that one?
No, just played a little bit of the video game, but never actually watched the series.
The series was really good too. Again, it just sort of more absurd humor, and I guess that was kind of my style because Animaniacs does a lot of that as well. I really like just the off the wall, weird shows. Ren and Stimpy was airing at this time, and I never watched it at the time. I watched it later when I was an adult, and that's sort of the same thing too. I love that off the wall, really weird stuff as well. But yeah, let's see if anybody has said anything. Okay. Oh yeah, Mike says Ninja Turtles, Ghostbusters, and Godzilla, and Samurai Pizza Cats and Gargoyles. Wow, yeah, there are so many shows that we haven't really talked about that are
That's
fantastic.
how many good ones there are that we just
Yeah,
haven't missed. I know Gargoyles was, yeah, during the mid '90s. That was another show I watched all the time too. I mean, that kind of took what Batman the Animated Series started with, and then took it to a whole nother level as far as like more adult themes and like drama stuff. And they were able to get away with a lot more too than most cartoon shows with like showing death and people getting shot and all that stuff. So, yeah, such a great concept. Gargoyles visually, how they looked, the characters looked awesome. Great storylines that tied into history and like the Shakespeare stuff. I love the character Macbeth, and then the whole arc. I think it was the second season with the hunters. That character, just that whole legacy and lineage of that character spawned throughout that whole season, I thought was great. And this visually, I think that mask he has with the three scratches he had from Demona, I just love that look. And
yeah.
yeah, so many good stuff in that series.
Yeah, and talk about the influence of Batman the Animated Series. Like, there's a perfect example. How, like, the designs, the style, the mood, so much of that show owes itself to Batman the Animated Series. And yeah, I loved that one too. That was definitely a highlight, and it was dark enough that at the time Disney didn't put their name on it. It was a Buena Vista production. And it aired in the Disney afternoon, but it was never Disney's Gargoyles. It was just Gargoyles by Buena Vista Productions, which is the name of their distributor, Disney's distributor. And Nightmare Before Christmas came out around that time as well, and it was also a Buena Vista. No, it was Touchstone. Disney didn't put its name on it either, just because of its sort of darker nature. But Disney's not afraid of that now. A lot of their movies are a lot darker and stuff, and so yeah, Gargoyles is definitely Disney. But
There is a show I think that deserves, I don't know, what other medium, whether a movie or a new animated series or even like video games, I think it'd be Gargoyle. There's so much you can do with that property and those characters. It's just, yeah, I hope that gets a second chance somewhere because I think it got cut off too short. I mean, it had 3 seasons, but the third season wasn't really that great when it went to ABC and was called the Goliath Chronicles. I didn't think it got the proper send off that it deserved.
Right, and they introduced some new characters and they actually they took the regular animation team off at that point, and then at that time the Little Mermaid TV show series ended, and they put that team onto Gargoyles.
Okay.
So the animation is softer, and you can see like some of those characters look like Little Mermaid characters. It does change quite a bit in that season there, and Gargoyles did get a second chance. Greg Weisman wrote some comic books just a few years ago, some Gargoyles comic books for slave labor graphics. I haven't read them, so I don't know if they're any good, but they were Greg Weisman, who was the head honcho of that show. So I think people seem to be pretty happy with it. I think
I was missed that or just forgot about it. I have to go check those out again because yeah, I'm always I'm up for more gargoyle stories. So yeah, if
Yeah.
they had some comics, I have to check those out.
Yeah, and the only reason they stopped, I think, is because the whole Marvel Disney merger happened, and so they had to kind of forfeit the rights, the
It's like
license.
it's almost becoming a joke now, like the curse of Greg Weisman. Like none of his series, as good as they are, never last their full length and reach their
Yeah.
potential.
Oh man, and yeah, talk about those shows. Of course, the other one is Spectacular Spider-Man.
Yeah.
That was such a good show. So I guess we could move into shows that we watched because we've kind of watched them up to our through high school. So we can go on to what are cartoons that you watched as an adult that have come out, either that are old that you never watched as a kid that you watch now as an adult, or new shows that have come out since you were an adult and you just really enjoy them.
I guess after high school, like mid 2000s, around 2005, six, I would say the main shows would be the main cartoon show would have been Justice League Unlimited. That's kind of when that series was wrapping up. But man, the last two seasons they had were some of the best like DC stories you're going to see. Especially Justice League Unlimited season one, where they did the whole Cadmus arc, and you had Amanda Waller not trusting the Justice League, and
Yeah,
you
yeah.
could get all that stuff with the Justice Lords that they did in season two, kind of brought in with the parallel universe and all that. It was just lots of great stuff in that season. And what I loved about that season of Justice League Unlimited, how that was supposed to be its final season, and they capped it off with the episode Epilogue, which was mainly about Batman Beyond and learning the history of like Terry McGinnis and all that.
Yeah,
And just
that was so good as a epilogue for not just Justice League Unlimited, but for Batman Beyond as well.
yeah, Batman the Animated Series even. I just loved how it tied into that. Just everything, because it was supposed to be the final episode of Justice League Unlimited, in that case, the DC animated universe. And how they ended that was so great, where they had Terry McGinnis' Batman Beyond suit flying the skies of Gotham, but recreating the very first shots we saw in Batman the Animated Series with Man-Bat flying over a blimp, and you see a police officer going like, "What's that?" They did the exact same beat in that like final sequence in that episode to kind of like have a nice end cap to their whole DC animated universe legacy. So yeah, during that time, like 2005, 2006, mid 2000s, Justice League was the show I was watching during that time. So good.
Cool. Mike wants to tell us that he was watching Avatar after high school. It was Avatar, Clone Wars, and of course now Rebels. Of course, you know Mike is a Star Wars guy, and you are too.
Oh yeah, I was gonna get to Clone Wars.
Yeah, you know, and a show that I really liked was the Cartoon Network Clone Wars.
Okay.
I really liked that show. I at that time I actually liked a lot of Cartoon Network shows on Powerpuff Girls and Dexter and stuff. And so when that show came out and it had kind of the same style, it was just fantastic. And just the I love Samurai Jack. That was another show that I really watched at that time. And so Clone Wars, that show reminded me a lot of Samurai Jack, just in the way they treated it like an old samurai movie, like in its pacing, in its cinematography. Samurai Jack did the same thing. And one of the best episodes I remember is the one where Mace Windu is just fighting droids the entire time. And he doesn't have a lightsaber, so he's just using the Force the entire time, just pushing them away and breaking them apart using the Force. And there was no dialogue. It was just all very well choreographed action, and it was fantastic. You don't see that in any Star Wars thing. I think I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a reason for that, because I like that series too. I remember when it came out, I was like, man, if these could just be full length, like normal animated series episodes, this would be amazing. But I mean, I'll take what I can get. That was before we even knew the Clone Wars CG series was coming, so I would take what Star Wars animation I can get. And I enjoyed it. The action was cool, but like you were saying, how you don't see that anymore. I think the reason is that because they really overpowered a lot of the Jedi in that series, doing things that they didn't do in the movies and like later on in the animated series. And that's probably a big reason why it's not considered in canon anymore, because they were just doing things that were just like maybe a little bit over the top. Because if you saw the stuff Mace Windu did there, you'd be wondering like, why couldn't pretty much one Jedi can win any battle in the Clone Wars? They wouldn't need to create a clone army or something like that. So, while it's hard to deny that it's cool action, I just don't think it fits into the normal Star Wars aesthetic that they established already with the movies and then later on with Clone Wars. So, but I have the DVDs, I love popping those in and watching them. And if you wanted to, there's not too much that contradicts what happens later on, like with episode 3 or in the Clone Wars. So if you have a personal canon, if you want to piece it in there, you can do that if you wanted to, but you just might have to get past like the over the top powers that the Jedi display there. But it's definitely great in action.
I loved it. I thought it was so great. It was. I think it's a masterpiece of a cartoon, whether it's accurate to Star Wars or not. Okay, I was mentioning how the Tick kind of opened up the world of underground comics to me. Well, while I was kind of exploring all those worlds, I discovered Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. Have you ever heard of that comic before?
No, actually. Mm-mm.
It's a bizarre underground comic, very rough and dirty, about a kid who is a homicidal maniac. It's incredibly gruesome and gory and violent, and hilarious too. It's really funny. And so it's by a guy named Jonathan Vasquez. And he went on to create a show for Nickelodeon called Invader Zim. And have you heard of Invader Zim?
No, you're calling me out on a lot of stuff I don't know about.
Wow. Okay. There's a show that I absolutely loved. And again, it's about a little tiny alien invader who's part of an armada of alien invaders. They each have to go to a different planet and conquer it. And so, but unfortunately, he's kind of a moron. So he comes to Earth to try and conquer Earth, thinking that he's a hotshot alien that can do all of this, but he's really not. The show is very odd. It's very weird and has a very offbeat, almost black sense of humor. One of the standout episodes I love is that, so he disguises himself as a kid and goes to high school in order to learn more about Earth culture so he can properly take over the planet. And he in the cafeteria, I think there's a food fight or something like that. Anyway, he ends up getting a zit on his face. And the zit, because I guess he's an alien or something, just starts to grow and grow and grow to enormous proportions. So, and then he finds out that once it's as big as his head, the swirling pus inside of it actually has a hypnotic effect on people. So he starts to hypnotize all of the people, and he calls his zit Pestulio, and he draws a little face on it, and he hypnotizes everybody. And then the zit just keeps on getting bigger and bigger, and pretty soon it explodes, and just the whole school is flooded with pus. And it's disgusting, and it's just weird and bizarre, but it's just hilarious. And it was Nickelodeon, and shown on, like, it wasn't an adult show like Clone High or anything like that. It was just mixed in with the rest of them. And I loved it. It was so good. Yeah, so check that one out too. Lots of recommendations from me. Andy says, Andy and Mike both say Spectacular Spider-Man was up in their shows there, so maybe we should talk about that show a little bit more. Spectacular Spider-Man, I think, is one of the best Spider-Man shows out there. They did such a good job of a fresh new take on Spider-Man that paid tribute to his history and his past, but also gave it a fresh update. They were faithful to the comics, yet original enough that it stood on its own and was its own show. And the stories were so good, and it got canceled after two seasons because, I think, because of the Disney-Marvel merger. I think maybe that was one of the fallouts there. Marvel was producing some fantastic shows at that time. Not only that show, but Wolverine and the X-Men was a one-season wonder, and it was incredible. Have you seen that one?
I haven't seen all the episodes. I started out with the first few episodes and then kind of caught it here and there. But I remember it ending on like a cliffhanger that was they're supposed to do like the Age of Apocalypse storyline or something. They
were, and it never happened.
You can't end it like that.
But the whole show, from start to finish, that show was really good. So those two aired at the same time, and I was watching those, and those are kind of, I was hoping that it would be kind of a rebirth of great superhero cartoons, but things stopped because of the Disney merger, unfortunately.
Yeah. For Spectacular Spider-Man, I actually didn't watch it till later on, like a few years after it stopped airing. And then when it came out on Blu-ray, I picked that up and started watching it. Like, man, now because I always heard how great it was, but I never got a chance to watch it. But watching that not too long ago, like, man, this really is a great Spider-Man series. And that, like you said, they paid respect to Spider-Man's history, but yet doing their own thing to keep it different. I loved what they did with Eddie Brock and Venom. That's always been one of my favorite storylines with Spider-Man. You know, Eddie Brock, the photographer, and Parker always in competition. But this one, did a total opposite effect, where there was almost like they had a big brother relationship with Peter and Eddie, and then you kind of see the falling out with that. And then when he becomes Venom, and that whole episode where Spider-Man gets rid of the symbiote suit, and he has kind of Uncle Ben there to guide him as he tries to fight off the symbiotes taking over. I love that episode. That's where you get the history of Spider-Man, where they don't actually, because it didn't start off with an origin story or anything. They really didn't mention too much about it till that episode. So I'm kind of hoping now that Marvel Studios has Spider-Man back and they're making movies again, that they kind of look to this show as inspiration, because they already said they want it to be set in high school. And the high school stuff in the Spectacular Spider-Man was great too. So if they're going to draw inspiration from anything, I think this would be a great place to look, because they did so many things right with Spider-Man. And like you said, just cut off way too short. At least it kind of had some resolution of its ending. I mean, that they wrapped up the arc they had for that season, but yet leaving the door open to continue on with other stories. But I don't think it was as bad as you were talking about with Wolverine and the X-Men.
No, it certainly wasn't as bad as that. But it was nice. Like the first season was fall, and then the second season was winter. And so it would have been at least nice to finish off the school year, have a spring season and a summer season, and then cap it at that. But yeah, there were a whole bunch of political things at work there that didn't allow it, which is too bad, because that was a fantastic show. A different focus, too. I mean, that one really paid tribute to the early days of Spider-Man when he was in high school, the Steve Ditko, Stan Lee era, whereas the old 90s cartoon was more of the kind of a 70s era Spider-Man, late 60s, early 70s era Spider-Man, when he's kind of out of college or just doing college at that moment or whatever, I can't remember. But yeah, so they were different in their own way, still great and totally both valid takes on Spider-Man, but yet very different takes on Spider-Man. So yeah, I love it. Yeah, and the quality of the animation in that one was really good too. They kept it simple. They streamlined the designs, and so they could afford to have some really slick-looking animation. That was one of my
biggest the issues of the 90s Spider-Man as far as animation goes.
Yeah, well, and even the 90s X-Men show, which the overly detailed characters trying to emulate comic book panels, like they didn't animate very well, and some of them looked downright ugly. And they rid themselves of that with streamlining it with the Spider-Man show. And Wolverine and the X-Men has equally great animation too, so check that one out. Okay, let's see what some other people see here. Andy says, I still wish CW had their kid blocks so that they could have had Young Justice, and maybe that's where Vixen could have been as a longer animated series. Yeah, so Saturday morning television doesn't really exist anymore.
Sadly.
Yeah, it slowly got phased out by the mid 2000s, I think, and now it's completely gone, and it's mainly because we have so many kid-specific 24-hour networks that they don't need to have kid programming anymore on basic cable networks like Fox, because and with the rise of Netflix and online streaming, like, you can access kids shows anytime you want, and with DVD and Blu-ray and all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't have cable. I have so many DVDs that my kids watch those, and we have Netflix, and it's kind of sad that it's like that. This generation doesn't have that like, let's rush home to school so that we can all watch the same show at the same time, or let's all wake up on Saturday morning so we can all watch the same show at the same time. I don't think kids are really all watching the same shows now. Like we can go and say, like when I was in school, everybody, in that first time when the first episode of Animaniacs aired, everybody was talking about that at school. But I don't think that kids in school are going to have that same experience now. Yeah. Because there are so many outlets for TV that everyone will pick something completely different. and that's too bad.
Yeah, like a lot of the new shows, like for instance the Disney XD stuff with their Marvel superheroes, those usually air on like Sunday mornings, and I know the new Ninja Turtles airs on Sunday mornings too. It seems like Sundays is becoming like the new Saturdays for the cable network shows. I wonder why that is, but
well, what airs on Saturday morning then on those ones?
That's the thing. I'm not sure, but like maybe it's reruns of those series, but the new episodes always premiere on Sundays now, which is I find kind of strange.
That is strange. Huh. Well, as long as they're still pumping out new stuff.
There's something at least.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. What are some of the shows that you are currently watching right now?
Currently watching, it's gonna not that many animated wise, but the two I have to bring out are my favorite. Of course, we talked about the early 2000s Clone Wars, and then the CG Clone Wars series. I know it's been canceled, it's no longer in production anymore, but that series was just phenomenal. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better Star Wars series, and to just have it add to the movies and this whole mythology of Star Wars was just so great, and even have storylines that are right up there with the movies and maybe even better than some of the movies. So Clone Wars set the bar pretty high for Star Wars TV, and one of the TV cartoons I'm watching now is Star Wars Rebels. Is, I think, for me personally, not quite on the same level just yet as Clone Wars, but it's going to get there with their storytelling and their animation. They're just, again, the same crew with Dave Filoni who worked on Clone Wars, and you have Simon Kingbird as an executive producer. Greg Weisman was producer on the first season, and they just really did a fantastic job establishing new characters, which was different than Clone Wars because they were using established characters already, like Anakin and Obi-Wan. And yeah, they brought in Ahsoka, who was new, and did a phenomenal job with her becoming a fan favorite for so many. And I think they're doing it again with Rebels, with characters like Kanan and Hera. Though I know those two are standing out as some of the ones, at least that I noticed, that fans are taking to. And now they're getting into stuff with Darth Vader, and then you're going to be tying more into the Clone Wars with Ahsoka being in the series and the Clone Troopers. So I can't wait for season 2 to begin, because it's, I think, going to be better than even season 1. But probably my favorite cartoon show on right now is the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series on Nickelodeon. That show is just awesome. I mean, I was a fan of Ninja Turtles back in the late 80s, early 90s when the original series started, and always followed like the video games that came out in the mid 90s, but never really got into the other animated series that came out in 2003. But when this new series started in 2012, it's like, okay, I'll check it out. I always liked Ninja Turtles. And like after the first episode, it just like re-sparked my turtle fandom that I didn't know was kind of going out a little bit. It just kicked it into a new gear where I got into the IDW comics. I was going back and reading old Ninja Turtle comics from like the early Mirage days in the 80s, and then just getting like catching turtle fever during that era, the 2012, when the Nick series first started. And that show just does a great job of establishing like the fun and humor of the turtles from the early 80s cartoon series, but yet adding some like serious drama to it with a family dynamic between the turtles and Splinter's history with Shredder. That's some of the best stuff of the series. So they just do a phenomenal job of just incorporating all these different elements of humor, action, like dramatic storytelling. It just does a great job, and just a perfect update to characters that maybe certain people thought was just, you know, a thing of its time, than the Ninja Turtles, like early 90s, late 80s, but they're proving to be a franchise that's going to be around for like every new generation, because if we keep getting series like this new one, that's going to stick around as long as like some of the best like comic franchise or superhero storytellings that we are now familiar with, like DC and Marvel. I think Ninja Turtles is going to carry on just like them, because this series is showing that there's so many great stories you can tell with these characters. So right now, that's my favorite cartoon show, and probably will be as long as it's on.
Cool. Yeah, I've only watched the first season of that one so far, and it has been really great. I've been totally enjoying it, and I love how it just is a throwback also to all the past iterations of Turtles. They've managed to take kind of the best of bits of all of them and mush them into one, making it just an awesome Turtles. Yeah, really good. I'm not really watching anything current right now. My boys absolutely love My Little Pony, so I've seen those episodes a bunch of times. And I'm trying to catch up on not the newest Avengers show, but the one before that called Earth's Mightiest Heroes.
Okay, that show is good. Yeah.
Yeah, that show is excellent. And I'm in this middle of the second season now, just finished the Skrull invasion part of it, and it's it's really, really good. I'm
Yeah.
absolutely loving it. And I hear the new one isn't as good, but I'll watch it anyways because I like to be in the
Yeah, I
know.
saw the premiere episodes of the new one, and yeah, it didn't have the same feel that Earth's Mightiest Heroes did. It just, yeah, it didn't click for me either. I know not a lot of fans are enjoying it, but can't say definitively if that it's not as good because I've only seen like 1 or 2 episodes. So
Right. Yeah. Well, it's got another season coming out, so it must be doing well. That's got to be, I think, 3 seasons or something. And then, yeah, I've seen a couple episodes of the Ultimate Spider-Man show too, and it's not as strong as Spectacular, but it's still fairly enjoyable. They take a much more comedic kind of Super Friends or Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends tone to it. There's a lot of kind of breaking the fourth wall, and it reminds me a lot of kind of Teen Titans humor in there, but I haven't seen enough of it to decide whether I like it or not. Yeah, it's mostly for me right now. I'm going back and watching old stuff because I'm now introducing them to my boys. They're 4 and 6, and so we're working our way through the old '80s Ninja Turtles. They love DuckTales and Chip and Dale, and even going back further to some of the classics. I love the old cartoons, like I mentioned, from the 30s and 40s. So old like Popeye, Tom and Jerry, and the old Looney Tunes and Mickey Mouse shorts and all that kind of stuff. So I go back and watch those ones all the time because I never get tired of watching those. That's
Yeah.
Oh, and Peter actually likes watching Digimon a lot because it was on Netflix.
Yeah, there's a reason why those cartoons you mentioned are classics. They stand the test of time and just carry on to each generation. Because yeah, I watched those growing up, and yeah, and like you said, good to hear that you're showing it to your kids and they're enjoying it too. And there's a reason for that because they are hilarious, especially the Looney Tunes stuff. I mean, I don't see how anyone cannot be a Looney Tunes fan if you like comedy and that stuff. They're just so good. You're feeling bummed and you just need to laugh at something, you can just pop in a Looney Tunes DVD or something and you'll immediately start feeling better. The humor that they have, yeah, it's so good.
So is there anything, are there any shows coming up that you think you're excited for?
Coming up, well, I will say, going back to the superhero stuff, I want to check out the new Guardians of the Galaxy cartoon. I mean, the animation looks good on that. And I mean, I'm kind of hoping maybe for a little Batman the Animated Series magic where that came out the same year that a movie came out. And even though Guardians is coming out a year after the movie, but it's basically got created because of the movie. It was so popular, much like Batman the Animated Series. So I'm hoping it can kind of do its own thing. And of course, in tone, it'll be totally different from Batman the Animated Series, but still have that same effect where it's a good quality show and everything. The reasons you love the Guardians of the Galaxy movie will translate into the TV show, but yet like setting itself apart from the movie and doing its own thing. So I'm excited for that one coming up this fall.
Cool. And there's a reboot of Danger Mouse that's coming out. I used to watch Danger Mouse when I was a kid as well. I watched that one all the time. And so there's a reboot coming out of that one where it looks a little flashier, more updated. Still 2D animation, I think, through Flash or something like that. But it looks like a lot of fun, so I probably will check out that one too. Yeah, it seems, of course, all the shows that we check out will be the ones that are reimagining the properties that we grew up with, like DuckTales. We'll watch that one, but probably not. We probably won't check out any new properties anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, kind of the problem with this era of like new cartoon shows. There's nothing, at least for me anyway, like something that came out that's brand new, like Animaniacs did back in the day in the 90s, and something that just is so different, but yet at the same time, it's good and it will be a classic a few years down the line. So far, there hasn't been anything as far as original content, especially in the comedy front, like cartoon shows that we had growing up. I mean, I haven't, like you said, actively kind of looked for any or know if there's any that's out there, maybe that I'm missing. But as far as that I'm aware of, I don't think there's been anything quite like what we had in the 90s for like new shows that got the attention of kids. And like I mentioned, in my case, even adults who got into it. So I don't know, maybe it's just becoming older and just sticking to the stuff that you like and not giving other stuff a chance. But I just don't think there has been anything quite like we had in the late 80s, early 90s era of cartoons.
Well, I think the closest you can get to that is My Little Pony at the moment.
Yeah, but even that's based off of the old
cartoon. About previous. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Well, there you go. maybe we should wrap it up. We've been talking for long enough, I think, and we've gone through our whole cartoon history of our lives, which has been pretty exciting. We thank you, everybody, for listening. Tim, do you want to do a plug for your podcast? One more plug?
Sure. Yeah, you can find me at Star Wars: The Saga Continues, our website, starwarstsc.com, or on Twitter at Star Wars TSC, and on Facebook, facebook.com/Star Wars: The Saga Continues. And then, as you could probably tell from me raving about Batman the Animated Series and the DC Animated Universe, I do host a Batman podcast called the Bat Fans Podcast. So you can check that over at the Batman Universe. And then I'm mainly active on social media with Twitter. I'm at TimG311. So you want to hear me chat more about these shows, because I usually do go back and tweet about these old cartoon shows that I used to love a lot. So you can find me there on Twitter.
And you can hear Mike and I are going to record an episode of the Pullbox podcast tomorrow, where we are talking about Bone, and talking about Pretty Deadly from Image Comics, and another one, We Three, but I don't have my copy to show you because I've lent it to Mike to read. So we are recording that tomorrow, and that episode will go live on September the 1st. And I encourage you to check that out as well. You can find out what we think of those books that we just read. Pullboxpodcast.com. Twitter's, Pullbox Podcast. You can send emails to the pullboxpodcast@gmail.com. And otherwise, thank you to everybody who is a Patreon supporter. We appreciate that very much. It helps keep us alive and well and doing what we love to do. And we are very excited that you are enthusiastic about what we're doing as well, because so are we. So if you're not a Patreon supporter, you can go over to ThunderQuack, patreon.com/ThunderQuack Network, I think, or go to ThunderQuackNetwork.com for all your podcast needs. There you go. Thanks for listening. This is us. So I have to figure out how to turn off this thing now. Okay. I think I got it. Say goodbye, Tim.
All right. See you later, everybody.